Rock County Board of Supervisors meeting to order on this 13th day of October 2022 and ask Supervisor Farrell to read the invocation and lead us in the pledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight, I'd like to share some words from one of my favorite presidents, Harry S. Truman. When I read these words, think of how we can apply it to our role as a county board supervisor. The first quote is, "America was not built on fear. America was built on courage, on imagination, and an unbeatable determination to do the job at hand." Men and women make history, and not the other way around. In periods where there is no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. The last quote, "You know that being American is more than a matter of where your parents come from. It is a belief that all men are created free and equal, and everyone deserves an even break." I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good job. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Lisa, if you'd please call the roll.
Beaver. Baumkamp.
Here.
Bryan.
Here.
Clayson.
Here.
Crary.
Here.
Cullen.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Fox.
Here.
Herman. Knutson. Levy.
Here.
Moini.
Here.
Pier.
Present.
Pennycook.
Here.
Podzilny.
Here.
Rashkin.
Here.
Richard.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Scholes.
Here.
Stevens.
Here.
Sutherland.
Here.
Sweeney. Towns.
Here.
Whitledge.
Here.
Wilson.
Here.
Winter. Woodman.
Here.
Zorro.
Here.
Bostwick.
Here.
28 present, 1 absent.
We have a quorum. Next item, please.
Next item is consent agenda. Consent agenda 4A, adoption of agenda. 4B, approval of minutes from September 22nd, 2022. 4C1, appointment to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. 4E1, authorizing purchase of Henderson Brine, Advantage, Brine Maker, and Henderson Truck Fill Pro. 4E2, support of increased child support funding. E3, authorizing acceptance of 2022 Edward Brine Memorial Justice Assistance Grant and amending the 2022 budget. E4, awarding contract for financial audit of county books for financial years 2022 through 2023. That is the end of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any objections to items on the consent agenda? Any questions about items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, consent agenda passes. Next item, please.
Next item is public hearing. There is no public hearing this evening. Item 6, citizen participation, communications, and announcements. We did not have any submitted prior to the meeting, and I did not have any slips brought up to me this evening either.
Are there any supervisors with communications tonight? Any supervisors? Supervisor Zorro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last meeting, I introduced a resolution to cut the treasurer's office budget by 50%. I'd like to inform the board that I have since withdrawn that resolution because the office is now open for in-person business. I'd like to thank members of the public who assisted in the matter. I'd like to thank all the supervisors that reached out to me privately and were supportive on the issue, and I'd also especially like to thank Rich Bostwick and Mary Moini for their roles in getting the office open back up for business. This will greatly help our taxpayers avoid added fees and improves our customer service levels.
Thank you. Any other comments? Supervisor Wilson?
Just like to report that the report we had from the library system on the merger has been passed by both Racine County and Walworth County, as well as Rock County, and so that merger is going to be moving forward in January.
Very good. Thank you. Other communications? Anything from staff this evening? I do have three, or rather two items. The strategic plan was to be completed online by last Friday. However, for one reason or another, there were some supervisors that did not get that submitted. For those of you in that category, you have a little packet at your desk. If you could fill that out and bring that to Monday's meeting, we'll collect them then, and that will be compiled as a part of the aggregate. So I will confess, you see I have one? Okay, I was, yeah, this is leadership here. Now, I was up north, and the cell signal was very spotty. I completed it. I clicked on submit, thought it was done, and then I found out it was not done. So I too have a little packet of shame here that I'll be turning in on Monday. So, speaking of Monday, remember we do have a meeting that night, and that will be another budget-related meeting, and we have started that one. That one will begin at 5:30, a little bit earlier in case we go long. So please put that on your calendars. Thank you. Next item, please.
Next item, item 7, nominations, appointments, and confirmations. We are done with those already. Item 8, recognition of county employees or others. We do not have any. Item 9, introduction of new resolutions or ordinances by supervisors for referral to appropriate committee.
Any supervisors wishing to introduce a new resolution, please bring it forward at this time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll have brief summaries of each of the proposed resolutions that came forward, starting with Supervisor Whitledge.
Yeah, mine is a little bit more of a transparent thing for vacant board seats and getting the community a little bit more involved in the process.
Thank you. Supervisor Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've submitted a resolution to add to our county website. It's a position description for county board supervisors. This description comes from the Wisconsin County's Handbook, and we were allowed to print that. It was originally taken from the Dunn County Supervisors page. My reason for submitting this is that I think it's a service to our community. If somebody wants to run for county board, they can go to a place where it tells the qualifications, what does a county board supervisor do, what's expected, and many other things. I think it would be very useful to have that information. I realize that we have 29 individuals here. We all think we all might have a different view of our role, but I think this description gives a very good description of what the role of a supervisor is, and I think it would behoove all of us maybe to look at it and take, see how things, how we're doing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Supervisor Zorl?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The resolution submitted is to consider the creation of an ad hoc committee to study moving the Rock County 4-H Fairgrounds.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item is item 10, reports. We do not have any reports this evening. Item 11, 11C, authorizing naming the recent acquired 5801 North River Road property as Rock River Heritage County Park.
Moved by Supervisor Richard, seconded by Supervisor Mohini. Supervisor Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the board knows, the county purchased the park formerly known as Campanian Trails, 178 acres of beautiful woodlands along Rock River. It was a once-lifetime opportunity to add to the parks system here. And now through input from an ad hoc group and the Parks Committee and a Parks Advisory Committee, we have a suggested name that was unanimously approved by the Staff Committee and the Parks Committee. And we're looking for acceptance of that tonight. And just as a aside, we should have a soft opening for the park any week now. We'll make sure we get the word out to everybody when that happens.
Thank you. Comments or questions on this item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next item, please.
Next item is item 11D, review of 2023 recommended budget with county administrator.
Fast, I like this. The big screen comes up. I got coffee too.
We can make the sign.
Awesome.
Well, I'm all set, so I guess we'll just go. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to talk to you tonight about the 2023 recommended budget and notice and administrative report. Your rules of procedure indicate that the county administrator shall make an administrative report on the state of the county to the county board and given tonight with the presentation of the budget. State of the county sounds mighty impressive, but the thought behind it, I think, is that there's really nothing better to indicate the state of the county than what our budget priorities are. And so we talk about that just in general tonight. But nothing, don't feel the need when I say something to like stand up and cheer and clap or anything like in State of the Union or anything. We can just move past that and you'll be out of here sooner if you do it that way. So I always like to start with harump, right? You can do that too. I always start with this slide. Service to the public is our fundamental reason for being. And I like to start with that just as the reminder as we think about our priorities. Why are we all here, right? We're all here because we're a public agency. We're providing service to the public. Every other week when I can, I go to orientation, and this is one of the first things that new employees hear from me when I talk about our mission, vision, and values, that this is sort of the main thing, right? This is why we're here. No matter what department, what position you're in, this is why we're here. So some of you who've seen me do this before also know that I like to show a few pictures of county employees and talk a little bit about some of the work that county staff do before we get into the numbers. And the reason I like to do that is because it's not every day that you get to see county staff and what they do. And tonight, what I wanted to do, based on the pictures that were sent in by the department heads, kind of the theme tonight in the pictures is about the workforce and things that are important and consistent with, I think, the theme of the coming year and one of the themes in the budget, which is about what makes people want to work for the county and why is that important when we think about things like recruitment, retention, and community engagement and communication. I know is something that's come up recently. So if we're talking about service, first thing I'll talk about as an example is United Way Day of Caring. So we have never done before this year participated in the United Way Day of Caring. And so this year we participated both as staff going out into the community doing service projects, and we had some sites as well for others in the community to come in and help with us. And so we had some parks projects, and so you can see here a couple pictures of some of the county residents and some of our staff actually in that bottom picture who helped out at the parks, and then another picture up to your right there of some individuals who helped out in our parks. And the lower left-hand side is a social media post from the Milton Public Library where some of our human services staff went and helped out in the children's area. And so an example of one of the things that employees, and particularly younger generation of employees, are looking for is they want a place that's engaged in the community, public service, and we are well positioned to do that. So very pleased with how this went this year and looking forward to continuing the partnership with United Way to help out both in the community and get some help from those in the community. Another place that we provide service is through our Public Works Department. So our leadership out at Public Works has done a great job in promoting and prioritizing work zone awareness and safety. And you can see here that one of the ways that they got the word out this year was by really having a very strong Work Zone Awareness Day campaign and event. And all these pictures that you see here on the county website, people sent these in and they were posted there. And a lot of activities that happened around Work Zone Awareness Day this year. And so here you can see, this is a county employee slide, and you can see staff from various departments, Sheriff's Office, 911, Human Services. You may recognize some folks on the 5th floor. And then both Dewey and Nick and their families up there supporting Work Zone Awareness Day. So that's good leadership. I appreciate the work they've done to do that. But just as important, maybe even more importantly, is that the community got involved in this effort. And you can see here again, it's both people from some of our neighboring jurisdictions. You've got some Footville staff in Janesville and Milton, Beloit Housing Authority staff up there in your upper right, and some community members. And so getting engaged with the community on this issue is really kind of the whole point, right? To raise awareness of work zone safety. So great work that the team has done out there. One thing that is probably not as apparent to those of you just looking at the pictures here is that these last two slides also include the colleagues, friends, and family of Randy Riley, who, as you know, his untimely passing occurred just right before this campaign. And one of the things that those of you who kind of watched, kind of what happened after that, was really the outpouring of support from our public works staff, in particular, to Randy's family. And kind of in the spirit of our conversation tonight, that really, to me, watching that is another example of one of the reasons why people want to work for Rock County. Those guys have each other's back, they support each other, and it was nice to see them come together in that difficult time. And so, just wanted to take a moment and share appreciation for public works staff here tonight. So as we talk about engagement with the community, some other examples here of where we're out in the community. Here we have some public health staff and a couple of these photos doing events. The one on the left there is a overdose awareness event. You've got the senior fair on the right with the ADRC out at the Dr. Williams Center. And then your top picture there at the 4-H fair, that's Fred Carr, our interim 911 director, who is here with us tonight. So I'm sure Fred's real excited that I just called him out. Thanks to Fred for stepping up in that role and also for doing this here as well. It's important, right? This community engagement work is important. And here we've got a variety of different things, but we've got our least experienced county residents to some of our most experienced county residents hearing about some of the good things that we're doing and things we can do for them. So it's important to get out in the community, and there's a lot of examples of this that 4 pictures can't really show, but it's happening all the time where we're out there doing things in the community. Another example of things that are on lists that employees want, and I've shared this with you before. They want to work for an organization that prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's lots of different examples I could give here. Here's a couple pictures that we have. On the left there, you have some of our public health staff at the Juneteenth event with Governor Evers. And on the right there, at the Stand Against Racism event in Lower Courthouse Park, that's our county equity manager, Tara Coleman, who was the keynote speaker that day. So we're going to continue to prioritize those kinds of things. And again, it's not just because the myriad reasons that you could support that, but in the spirit of this conversation, people want to work for organizations like that. And so we want to continue to use that and promote that. But of all the things that I've talked about, our DEI work, community engagement, public service, all those things, sometimes it's just that people want to work for an organization that they like to work for, that's fun. So, working at Rock County is fun, right? Here's some examples, but not too many examples, not too much fun, right? But here's some examples of things that are kind of in that fun category. We've got dinosaurs, donuts, and dogs. So, what else could you want in an organization that you work for? And if not evidence here, these are the two on the lower right, the ones with the canine unit and with the lower right-hand corner there, those are from our family fun night that occurred out at the highway shop. So there's proof. We have family fun night. The county is fun, right? so that, and who doesn't want some county-branded swag to feel like that you're proud of where you work, right? So, or for your kid to have it, so they're proud of where their mom or dad works, maybe. And then, of course, no organization is complete without their own ugly holiday sweater contest. So, just some examples of kind of some of the fun things that go on that you don't see every day, and that to help create an environment where people want to come work and want to stay. And one of the sort of one of the themes here, again, if you kind of reflect back over those, is hardly any of those were actually staff like sitting at their desk or working in their office. Those are all examples of being out in the community and doing things. And again, I think it's just a good example of things that you don't always think about that the county staff do all the time. All right, so that's my sort of fun part of the presentation before we get into the numbers, just to kind of give you a flavor of kind of what some staff do sometimes. And now we'll move on into some of the numbers. And so I'll try not to go too quickly to gloss over the numbers because there's a lot of numbers here, but I'll try not to go too slow that you fall asleep by the time I'm through the numbers. So it's that fine balance there between trying to get through it in time. So our first number, so just the pie chart of the recommended levy. So here we have our overall increase in the tax levy for 2023 in the recommended budget, 3.37%. I'll talk about how that breaks down here in a minute. But if you see on the right side there, tax levy in 22, just under 73.7 million. The total increase is just under 2.5 million. Tax levy then in 23 would be 76.1, almost 76.2 million. And here's how that breaks down. So we have a little unique situation this year that I'll just take a couple minutes to try to explain to you. So there's 3 different categories of levy that the county can levy. And the largest one, obviously, here on the left is for operations. So when we talk about tax levy limits and how much we're able to increase the taxes under the levy limits, that's what we're talking about for operations. That's the term we use. The traditional amount that we have to levy for operations is in the blue. So that's net new construction. So when we talk about levy limits, we're able to increase the tax levy by the net new construction. And in 2023, that amount is $1,175,831. So that's a number that's pretty consistent with the levy increase for net new construction we've had in prior years. In 2023, however, we have this red amount as well that the levy limit formula allows us to increase the levy to accommodate. And that is for what is listed here as terminated TIDs. So I don't know how familiar you are with TIF districts. It's a municipal thing. Some of you have been on city councils before and are more familiar with that than others. It's not something that we usually deal with as a county. We don't have the authority to create TIF districts or TIDs. But what this is essentially is that when a municipality creates a TIF district, what happens is that the growth in that district, in the taxes and the property values, we don't get to share in that, and as far as taxation goes. So every time there's a TIF district created for the term of the TIF, the county does not get to, we kind of lose a little bit of opportunity there to have some tax revenue. So what happens when they close is a number of things. Those go back on the tax roll. We all get to share in that revenue again, and there's an accommodation made in the levy limit formula. This isn't actually what the law says, but essentially to account for over time some of that lost revenue that we've not been able to get. So in 2023, there were several large TIF districts that closed, and so this is the opportunity as well. And that resulted in $1,160,812, and so those things add up to $2,336,643, and that would be what we would consider our operational revenue. And again, that's the max that we're able to levy in 2023. These other 2 categories are smaller. So the debt levy that you see in green, that is green if you can see it, debt service levy. So what happens there is that when we go out to borrow, we borrow that money, and when we pay it back through the debt service levy, which is not under levy limits. And in 2023, that will only increase by a little over $56,000. The limited levy in purple there's 2 things in the limited levy. One, Supervisor Wilson mentioned before, which is funding of the Arrowhead Library System, soon to be the Prairie Lake System. And so that is outside levy limits, and there's formulas that that are used to calculate that. We don't really control that. We just have to include that in our budget. And the other one is town bridge aid. And those are both not under operational because they're not levied on all taxable property in the county. And so therefore it's outside of that and it's separate from the operational levy. So that's $89,000 increase in 2023. So here you can just see some trends. I know there's a lot of lines going on here. On the left is the percentage, on the right is the number. So if we look historically back to 2010, what has the tax levy percentage increase been? You can see on the far right there in 2023, that's the figure I just gave you, just above 3.3%. And you can see it's changed over time. Interestingly, back here where I've got this little arrow, back in 2012, that was when the law changed. It used to be that levy limits there'd be a floor. You couldn't go below 2%, but if your net new construction was higher, you could get higher than that. That was removed in 2012, and the new law, which exists today, is 0% or increase in net new construction, which is why several of those years since then, we've been below 2% increase. 2020, you see there was a higher number there. That was mostly due to debt service increase at that time. But you can see the trend, right? And on the right, the dollar amounts, just to give you some context about what this year's recommended tax levy increase, how it fits into over the last several years. Tax levy increase by type. This is just another way of thinking about those three categories. In this one, the limited and the operational are combined. That's the blue. The red is the debt service levy, so red is very small at the top of that far right column. As I mentioned earlier, and you can see in other years, the debt service levy has been much more significant. And as a matter of fact, in 2022, the debt service levy actually went down, which is why it's below the mark there. So the tax rate. A lot of times when the media will cover increases in local government taxes, they'll talk about the tax rate. And the tax rate does have a factor in sort of what taxes people pay, right, depending on their property's assessed value. But it's also not necessarily the most direct way to think about kind of what's happening here. So for example, here, in the proposed budget, the tax rate would decrease to $4.68 per thousand of value on property. And you can see that decrease has been in place since 2014. Now, maybe this is just a coincidence, but 2014 was the year I was hired, so I'm not sure if that has anything to do with that, but just as an aside, would note that. But really, what it's more likely consequence of is this, which is equalized value. So essentially what happens, just to make it simple, is the tax rate will go down when your equalized value goes up more than your levy. And equalized values have been going up a lot, also since 2014. Just saying. So you can see here it goes up again pretty significantly in 2022. Now we've got $16.2 billion worth of equalized value. So if you can see, these two are really kind of inverse in how they kind of play with each other there. So just a point of interest there about tax rate and equalized value. Expenditures. So not all of our expenditures are from the levy, right? We get a lot of grants and things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the red and the blue line here, so the red line, total expenditures, which includes like capital expenditures. Your blue line is your operating expenditures. So overall, $218 million budget. So if we want to talk about what is the budget, it's $218 million budget recommended in 2023. And then revenues by source. So as I said, we get a lot of revenue from non-levy sources. Actually, the largest is from what we call intergovernmental revenues. That's the green wedge of the pie there. Things like medical assistance, federal grants for a variety of things. And that is our largest share. Now, that used to be over 50%. So when people talk about, is the state and the federal government funding us for the services that they require us, in some cases, to provide, not as much as they used to on a percentage basis. Taxes are the next biggest pie there at 35%, and the county sales tax at the bottom, the red slice of the pie at 8.7, has been growing over the years as a percentage of our budget. So this one's a little confusing here, but I'll take a minute to explain it. So this is sales tax collections and appropriations, and this is from the beginning of when the sales tax was implemented. So some of you have seen this before. I've had it in the budget presentation every year. Think of the purple and the green together and the red and the blue together. So if you think about the purple and the green, So to start with the green. The green is the amount that the county has budgeted in sales tax collections every year. The purple has been what has been collected every year. So we budget and then we collect, and then the difference is really between the green and the purple. So when we talk about excess sales tax and the excess sales tax account, it's generated in between those two lines. That's what that is. And we've had a little bit of, during the pandemic, and you've heard this story before, back in 2020, the county board reduced what was budgeted, which doesn't actually show up there because that's the budgeted amount in 2020. In 2021, we were still cautious about the pandemic, and we didn't increase it as much too. That's the dip that you see there by where the word total is. But as you can see from the purple line, actually, it's been increasing during the pandemic, and so really pretty significantly. So you can see back in 2021, we collected over $18 million. We only budgeted about 16.2 this year. So again, we should expect another couple $1 million to be added to that excess sales tax account if things continue to work out as they're trending right now. And in 2023, a little more of an increase. We're just about $18.9 million that I'm recommending we budget for that. The red and the blue line, the red line is how much of sales tax has gone to operations. The blue line is how much to capital. So last year, I was very excited for the first year. We'd held the line, that red line pretty, actually very, very straight since 2011. We hadn't added any more sales tax to operations since then. And capital, for the first time last year, exceeded the amount we had for operations. So that was a good accomplishment. It continues to exceed the amount for operations. But as you can see, there's a slight uptick there. And I will talk about that in a minute. So I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, so I keep you engaged. Nobody leaves the room. So that essentially is the sales tax picture. That's the best way that I've found to kind of present that. And so continued very, very positive results from sales tax collections. And what sales tax use? So this pie will look a little different than last year. Operational expenses, again, below 50% at 46%. We continue to provide $200,000 annually, to the PACE program. And then we've got our capital projects and expenditures, and then a separate category for highway projects and equipment. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But that's how the sales tax pie would shake out in 2023. So unassigned general fund balance, I always like to talk about this a little bit. Again, I think in some ways a point of pride for the board. It should be a point of pride for the board. Back in 2014, we had an unassigned general fund balance of just over 28 million. Unassigned is the term that would be used in your general fund balance to describe the money that sits there. It may not be in cash sitting there, it's invested, but it's your savings account is the way people like to think about it. We don't have a separate rainy day fund, so to speak, but it's your rainy day fund in a lot of ways. It's what's set aside, under certain financial rules. You want to fund a certain number of months of operations in case the tornadoes come through and tear down all our buildings. We have some money there we can rebuild, setting aside insurance. But as you can see, that has grown not insignificantly over the years. $12 million increase that we expect by the end of 2021 there. 2021 audited statements actually have that be the number, and we expect it to increase in 22, maybe just a little bit more, not a whole lot. But when you hear me talk about conservative fiscal management, this is really sort of one of the outcomes of that, is that we budget conservatively, and at the end of the year, we end up spending less than we've budgeted in most years. I mean, not in every department, every kind of account, right? But on an aggregate, we end up saving money. And so what that has done is gotten us to a point where we've gotten within our, both sort of what our industry standards are for rainy day fund, and we're actually a little bit above where the Finance Committee's policy is on where our unassigned general fund balance should be. So that's why last year the county board approved putting some of this into, 2 million of it, as a matter of fact, into highway projects to reduce borrowing. So I'm sure this will be another topic of discussion. All right, so that's just the general overview of the numbers. So now typically move into a little bit of capital, and then after this, a little bit of operational. So we'll start with the capital. So highway. So one of our big sources of capital or projects, or I guess one of the big recipients of capital funding is highway projects, which we have prioritized over the years. So again, going back to 2015, you can see a general increase in this trend here. This will show you the variety of sources that we've used over the years to fund highway projects. Blue being borrowing, red being sales tax, and then a couple other colors in there. One thing, if I point down to the far end this year, in the last 2 years, you can see I mentioned that $2 million that we put into highway projects from the general fund. That reduced borrowing quite a bit to that small blue section there, the lowest it had been in at least a dozen years or more. And then the red there, which was sales tax. In 2023, reverting to a little bit more of what has been common as far as the amount of borrowing over the years. And you can see that number is about 3.6, just under $3.7 million in borrowing, the sales tax amount. And then that little blue area at the top is a little unique this year, $281,000 is from the sale of the job center. So when the job center closes this year, we'll expect to get a little over $1 million from those proceeds. And that funding must be used for other capital projects in the way that we've chosen to deal with that. So of that $1 million, my recommendation is we put about a quarter of that beginning next year into highway projects, again, to reduce what others might be borrowing. So that's the way it looks there. And again, I could just point out the trend. This has been an area that the county board has continued to prioritize over the years, and increasingly so. So county highway projects, I won't read all these off to you, but here's what is funded in the recommended budget. Project add-on County N, and you can see here these first three are all what we would call pulverize and overlay, cheaper than reconstruction. And that has been one of the strategies out of Public Works by increasing actually funding over those years, is to catch up on reconstruction and get into the pulverize and overlay, which will help extend the life of the highway and is cheaper. And so that is part of the strategy here. So a project on N, a project on X, a project on E. And with E, you'll note this one is being funded by federal funds from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, as some of you may have heard about it. So these are federal funds. This is a Fed aid project. So it's good that federal money is coming back to us. County H design is the amount from the job center sale I mentioned earlier, and then some seal coating projects as well. Just to point out the picture here, this was a picture from the accident that occurred on the interstate earlier this year. And you can kind of see the accident remnants there. Fortunately, no one was hurt in this accident, but pointing out this thing behind the truck there called an attenuator. When we talk about equipment purchases in Public Works, that's an example of some of the equipment that we're purchasing because it's safety related, right? And we've already established that we've been prioritizing that. So just a summary of county highway projects. So you can see for construction, borrowing just under 3.7, as I mentioned, sales tax just over $1 million. That Fed aid number I mentioned in there. We're getting state aid of just under $1 million for 2 projects, which is also great, that job center figure. Also $750,000 in sales tax to maintenance, like seal coating and crack sealing, which are just sort of just under the construction threshold, right? We're just maintaining by doing those things, even though in some cases we're laying stuff on the road. And then there's this category, the additional category next year of equipment depreciation. So this is another area of change in the budget that I want to spend a little more time on. Before I do, though, you can see that photo there to the right. Those are some of our quads that we purchased in the last couple of years. There's 7 of them there, as a matter of fact. Some of you remember we purchased those. These days it's taken a couple years for those to come in. But this was actually something that we submitted to the Mack Truck Calendar Contest. I don't know. I've never seen the calendar. I don't know if we won, if we got in there or not. But it was a nice picture, so I used it here as well. But that's a great example about depreciation. So the way depreciation works in the highway budget is that when we buy things like attenuators and Mack trucks, we pay cash because we have a fund balance out at a Public Works. We pay cash. And then by the state's accounting rules, we're required to depreciate that over the years of its useful life, how many years it's in service under depreciation rules. So that's all, inside baseball kind of stuff, really. But the point is, like, depreciation in that way acts like we're paying ourselves back. So you think about it almost like as we're loaning ourselves money, we're buying it with cash, but we're paying ourselves back over time through depreciation. So what typically has happened is that, and this is the trend, so let's talk about this first here. So figure 13 is what our depreciation budget has been in the highway budget since 2012. So you can see back in 2012, $680,000 was spent in depreciation, and that 1.7 million number I mentioned earlier. So again, here the trend has been to increase. And why is it increasing? There's two reasons. One, costs are going up, and recently we all know costs are going up quite a bit. The other is that, again, we've prioritized trying to update the fleet, reduce the overall age of the fleet, which should show up in reduced maintenance costs over time. And Public Works is on a cycle to try to, like a 5-year plan, to try to increase the investment in the equipment here. But the consequence of this is that the increase that we're seeing here, $1 million, let's call it, it's hard to sustain that with tax levy. And up until the recommended budget in 2023, that all was funded from tax levy. All of that equipment was tax levy funded. And in a limited tax levy resource environment, and regardless of whether or not one agrees with the amount of levy that is being levied or being recommended to be levied, it is limited in some ways, right? So it's hard to continue to do that and continue to fund the county's other priorities. And so what I'm recommending in 2023 is that $1.7 million be funded with sales tax instead. And the consequence of that is still a capital expenditure, but it frees up levy for other purposes. I'm sure there'll be some discussion about that going forward. So here's a picture. We talked about highway. The other big capital thing we often talk about is facilities. And there's not a whole lot of really large facility projects that are being proposed this year in the same way that we have had as we've implemented the master plan over the last several years. But I thought this picture was good because it really identified several things that are in process or coming. So in the foreground here, in that black building that's halfway constructed there, that's the new IT space where our data center will be and our IT staff will be located. There's an addition on for 911 as well, and then the adjoining building is the 911 center. Here you can see kind of behind that old-looking tall building there, you start to get into the jail and the sheriff's office. That's the Pinehurst building, the former 1920s tuberculosis sanatorium that houses both the sheriff's administrative offices and minimum security and Huber housing up on the upper levels there that needs to be replaced. And you can see the rest of the sheriff's office behind there. Then peeking through the trees is the healthcare center, slated for demolition and still in 2024 potentially. We've got another year to go to see how that goes. We've got to get some staff out of there. And then of course in the back, and you can see Rockhaven, which now has 2013 construction date. That will be paid off in 2026. So lots of work going on out at the complex, and more to come, obviously. But just a great aerial view, I thought, of some of the stuff going on out there. And then this is a slide that we talked about last year as we contemplated some of these capital projects, the percentage of the debt limit. So you can see we still have a very low debt limit. In 2022, we're actually a little bit lower than we were last year with our debt limit. Debt limit is the amount of debt that we would be allowed to borrow. It's not that we will ever approach that. It's a very high number, and counties don't approach that. But it's a measure just comparatively of where we are, and it's still very low. Now, the thing I would say about this, though, is this does not include any of the sheriff's office project yet, because we have not borrowed for that yet, so we're not repaying it yet. There's also other borrowings that you'd expect to see in the coming year to borrow for highway projects that from last year's budget that we haven't borrowed for yet, and the ones that I have in this year's budget that we haven't borrowed for yet. Typically, we have not borrowed every year to keep our borrowing costs down, so you see some of that spike in debt service repayments. So just to frame this for you here then is that in 2022, this is really pretty consistent with numbers we've seen over the past 8 and 10 years. But I would expect that in the 2024 budget, when we do some borrowing and maybe begin to repay some of that's going to go up. So just think about that for next year. All right, so some notable projects, initiatives, and budget changes. Classification and compensation study. So as I mentioned before, one of the themes of the budget this year is how do we attract, retain staff. This is an issue that is not new. We've talked about this. This was approved in last year's budget. So here's what I can tell you right now. So the 4% increase, so I've used that number before at staff committee. I didn't want to commit to it because I wasn't sure up until like last week that we could still even make it work in the budget. And you are welcome to agree, to disagree with me that it does work in the budget. But that's how it's proposed. So a 4% increase in the personnel lines equals $3.6 million. So that is both wages and our FICA, or Social Security, and retirement. And so $3.6 million of new money put into the budget for wages. So one thing I think it's important to begin to communicate right away as staff begin to think about what this means. This does not mean that all positions will be recommended to get a 4% cost of living adjustment, right? So historically, the county has provided a across-the-board cost of living adjustment to all staff. And it may be that that's what you would decide to do. However, doing so and giving everybody the same increase would perpetuate the same potential disparities that exist right now in our pay grids that we're trying to rectify a little bit. So you don't need to decide about that today, and you certainly don't even need to decide about it necessarily in the budget adoption, because that'll be a separate resolution. So we don't yet even have that information. We hope to have it in the next couple of weeks, and then at some point, maybe sort of in a parallel path, with the budget adoption, is there's going to be a separate action to be brought to you to discuss implementation of the wage study. And what might that look like? As I've said before, it could be a multi-year implementation. We may not, 4% is likely not enough to get everybody close to market. As I say up here, we have to prioritize some of our under market, difficult to recruit and retain positions. But goals would include things like getting onto one pay grid for our non-represented employees. Non-represented means our non-sheriff's office bargaining units, along with the consolidation of personnel policies. So these are things that you won't see in the budget. The only thing you really see in the budget there is that $3.6 million. But just to get to you to begin to think about, why are we doing this? Both to address some of those market issues, but things like making it easier to manage. We have I don't even know how many pay grids we have. We have a lot of pay grids that have been sort of legacy from union bargaining that have been in place since Act 10. And I would say we are one of the few remaining counties or even local governments in the state that still have all those pay grids in place. And it makes it really difficult for administration. So you just approved the Ceridian HR payroll system. And having all these different pay grids and each of those different groups having different policies creates a nightmare for our payroll staff who have to manage all these different things, right? And so that will be another benefit, hopefully, that we're able to accomplish by consolidating that down into one grid where there's a set of rules that apply to everybody. And that will make implementation of the new system as well easier, hopefully next year. So this is obviously a significant priority. So how do we do it? Well, there's several techniques, I guess, strategies that were employed in the budget to be able to do that. So number one, that increase in the levy limit ceiling due to the terminated TIDs gave us more money, right, potentially to play with to do that. And so that was helpful. The $1.7 million in sales tax for county highway equipment depreciation, that freed up $1.7 million that be devoted to other things like wages. I'll talk about this in a minute. On your next slide, reduction in out-of-home placements for children and youth. There's a long-standing trend here now that we continue to do that. That does free up money for other things in the county budget. There were a limited number of levy-funded position requests that I recommended. Again, that was intentional to try to prioritize funding for our current staff and not necessarily for new staff that we were creating. So you'll see that there were positions that were asked for that I'm not recommending because of this. We reevaluated our vacancy factors based on trends and priorities to try to tighten those up a little bit, and then various other reductions that occurred. And so that was sort of the big picture strategy of trying to devote as many resources as possible to the compensation study. So here's a figure I show every year because the impact of out-of-home placements for both children and youth and adults on your next slide has a significant impact on the county budget every year, just because they're so expensive. So you can see here this trend, and this shows the green is the total, the blue is Child Protective Services, and the red is for juvenile justice. And you can see the trend here back from 2017, where we peaked at the top of that green line, to where we are now. So those of you who were at Human Services Board yesterday heard a presentation discussion about this very topic. And so when we talk about the efforts that have been put in place over the past several years to serve kids in their homes, with their parents and not pulled out, this is sort of the manifestation of that. So it's important for me, even though I'm sitting here talking about dollars, that this line is a consequence of that good policy work and not the reason for it, right? So even though it saves money by not having costly out-of-home placements, that's not why we do it. And a matter of fact, a lot of that money gets reinvested in trying to keep those kids safe, in their homes. And so it's not just that it's freed up to go pay for wages or other things going on, right? But it's an important trend to see. It's very impactful on what the county does. And you can see that in 2022 we were significantly under budget, trying to be again a little more conservative. Again, not assuming that trend is going to continue to go down. So we're budgeting a little bit more in 2023 than our 2022 estimate would indicate. Just to be a little more cautious about that. I would much rather be conservative about this and again give a little bit of money back to the general fund than have to draw down from the general fund because we were overly ambitious. Now here's the trend for adults. Not as good. You can see here that we are budgeting $5.4 million for out-of-home placements for adults in a variety of different settings here. State institutes are the green. Those are very costly. We've got adult family homes and CBRFs. We've got some crisis stabilization. That's the orange line there, and some other smaller ones in hospitals and so forth. And so this is an example of where investing in things like crisis stabilization are intended to bring down our state institute costs. But as you can see here, this one's been a tougher nut to crack. As I think you can imagine, and you've heard, during the pandemic, that just mental health issues everybody's facing. This is not immune to that as well. And so we continue to have a lot of things in our community with regard to adults and their needs for support that are manifested here, and again have a pretty significant impact on the budget overall. One new human services related figure I wanted to show you was with regard to economic support. So we've not had this one before, but I thought it was interesting to show the same sort of multi-year trend here. So this is the unduplicated caseloads for our economic support programs, largely medical assistance, Medicaid cases. And you can see here, since 2019, we've had 3 years of increases. And so this is sort of like the average monthly caseload. And so you can see here, again, this is this also is sort of partly due to the pandemic, where more people have been in need, and there's been federal rules in place where those folks get to stay on the caseload extra long. Those rules are ending soon, and our economic support staff are going to have a boatload of work to do if you hear a term called unwinding, that's what that's about, where we've got to kind of go back to those pre-pandemic policies about who's eligible, and they'll have a significant effect not only on the changing caseload and workload for our staff, but then on the community as well, making sure those folks who are leaving the caseload are not left without any support. All right, so those are three human services related graphs that we always like to talk about what happens in human services because it is our largest department, even if not all of our initiatives necessarily are related to them in 2023. So Rockhaven also area of focus in 2023. The good news at Rockhaven is that over the years we've talked about our star ranking and where that was, and it's been up and down, and in the past several years down a little bit more than up. But the good news is that we're four-star facility right now, which is great. Our staffing is at 5 stars, has been at 5 stars. Historically, we have a very high staffing ratio, good staffing rate, which I like to think leads to some of that quality ranking. So good news at Rockhaven from that perspective. And so we're always very proud of this as a measurement. At the same time, there are challenges at Rock Haven that really are challenges we're facing everywhere else with regard to recruitment, retention of staff. And they cause these challenges here that I would note. So first of all, only 96 of our 128 beds have been filled due to staffing shortages for most of this year, and that is sort of the budget premise that we will make for Rock Haven next year. I think it's the most credible decision to make about thinking about revenue. Now, these staffing challenges aren't just localized here. These are national issues about competition for direct care staff and wages and all sorts of things that are hard for any one jurisdiction or one facility to get their hands around. Inflation and supply chain issues are also increasing prices and availability of goods out there. I think you would not be surprised to know that food costs are going up, right? And we've got a lot of food costs out at Rock Haven. So the consequence of that is that all else being equal with those factors, we would need $3.1 million more in levy, or that's a 72% increase, which would need to be requested to maintain current operations. So $3.1 million, you remember the numbers I showed you earlier about even with the terminated TIDs, we had just over maybe $2.4 million, right, in new money to spend everywhere. And so $3.1 million is not a sustainable figure for increase in operations at Rock Haven. So the 2023 budget includes this list of things that we've done here to sustain those operations. So number one, the remaining $1.2 million in the ARPA lost revenue monies is included in the budget for Rock Haven operations. I know that there's been lots of other thoughts about what we could use that money for. We bought a park. We talked about that earlier, right? That was a good use of those funds. But we also, in prior year budgets, last year's budget, we included things like equipment purchases at 911 and IT, because that money was intended, right, to help these sort of deficits that are still out there. We can use it for anything that we'd call general government operations. So that's $1.2 million. So here's what I was holding that drama for, $1.1 million sales tax to fund operations. So that's the little uptick on that red line I showed you on the sales tax slide. And again, first time since 2011 that we have added any sales tax money to fund direct operational costs in the budget, even though we're not dumping it into just the general fund that we might, we might use anywhere. It's still operational, directed. So other things, obviously the classification compensation study will have an effect on wages out there, which could help as far as recruiting and retaining staff. Given the national issues, I think that is not going to be sufficient. That will help, but I think there's other things that we're going to have to do to help with that. And so, for example, I've recommended $75,000 in sales tax for consulting engagement out there, just assuming we're going to need some professional help, maybe to work through some of these creative ideas. And we're just going to have to develop a plan to change that revenue expenditure dynamic in order to keep this from happening. Or the board is just going to have to accept and invest resources that are necessary to keep Rock Haven operating at a higher level of need going forward in the future. But I would expect that in 2023, we'll be spending a lot of conversation time on what is it that we should do at Rock Haven. And I think it's going to be, we have to be creative. And I know that, Natalie has already offered some ideas. Those of you who attended the pre-budget meeting, she had some ideas about what we could do out there, and I know she has others. And so we're just going to bring all the good brains together and try to think of what we can do creative in order to close that gap a little bit and figure out how we can reduce the levy need out there. So budget adoption process. Next Monday at 5:30, as the chair indicated earlier, is what we call the administrator's review and explanation of the budget. That's your opportunity to ask questions. Typically no questions tonight as you digest things. But on the 17th, next Monday, we'll all get together at 5:30, and I will go through each committee in committee order, starting at the top, and then each department under those governing committees in order, talk about the more granular priorities and changes in each of those departments, and then answer your questions. So, or try to answer your questions, maybe is a better way of saying it. So ask away. This was the first year in which we have done this Q&A session on the Monday following this presentation. Typically it's been in November. And we're trying something different this year to try to give the board a bigger picture overview of what's going on in all the departments earlier, so that when you meet, beginning as soon as Tuesday, whenever your governing committees meet between Tuesday and budget adoption, there will be a budget discussion on your agenda, and that'll be another opportunity just with your governing committees, the departments that you see in your governing committees and the department heads to have a conversation about the budget and what that means for their operations. It's at those meetings that you can do what we call appeals. If the committee feels like there's some change they want to see in the budget related to that department, the committee can vote on it, and those votes will then go on to Finance Committee. Wednesday, November 9th is the public hearing on the budget. So 6 p.m. here, public hearing on the budget. Then the very next day, the Finance Committee just established this at their meeting before this meeting. That's the date. They'll meet at 5 p.m. to hear those appeals from the governing committees. So governing committee wants to make a motion. They want to change something in the budget. It'll go to Finance. The Finance Committee will vote whether to endorse that change. And if they do, it'll be up first on the agenda when the budget is open for consideration on Tuesday, November 15th at 6 p.m. As a reminder, things go through the committees, the appeals, they go through Finance. Finance will endorse it. Even if Finance doesn't endorse it, or if you want to do something else that didn't go through the committee, on the 15th of November at 6 p.m., open season on anything you want to do, right? So we'll work through those Finance things, and then anybody can raise their hand and make a motion and get a second, and we can debate anything you'd like about changing the budget. So certainly feel free to work through your committees, but also know that you don't have to, right? You still have an opportunity to affect the budget through deliberation, as you always do at a county board meeting. So that's it. So this will be posted, this presentation, as well as the budget detail will be posted on the website tomorrow morning. Haley will get that done first thing in the morning. And so any member of the public that wants to see it, if you want to go out and look at it in more detail, it'll be out there in the morning. We also have some hard copies, I believe, here. There was a little survey that was done. You could decide if you wanted a binder, if you wanted a little spiral one, or neither. And so we do have some hard copies here after the meeting. If you want to pick those up, feel free to do that as well. And with that, normally I ask for questions, but I don't want any questions today. Thank you for that. We'll talk about that on Monday. And with that, thank you for listening and your time.
Thank you. Before we go to the next item, just reiterating what Josh said about our next meeting, that is next Monday night. That's October 17th, 5:30, right here. Next item, please.
Next item is 12, adjournment.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Supervisor Crary, Supervisor Herman. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.